What if I told you that the very ground beneath your feet, the park you walk through, or maybe that old library you remember, might not actually be public for much longer? Today we're doing a deep dive into something that's been happening kind of quietly, but on a huge scale.
Right.
The sell-off of public land and property across England, especially over the last decade or so. Our mission today is really to unpack why this is happening, what the actual impact has been, and what it could mean for you and your community down the line. We're trying to get the full picture here, looking beyond the headlines.
Yeah, and I think to really get it, you kind of have to look back a bit first. Public authorities in Britain, particularly in the 19th and 20th centuries, they spent a long time building up these really significant land holdings. We're talking parks, hospitals, schools, council housing estates, all accumulated piece by piece, really for the collective benefit. It wasn't just random buying. It was, well, foundational to public services.
Right.
For everyone.
Okay, so when we say public land, what exactly are we talking about? Is it just parks and things? And what's the picture now? Like, who owns what today?
Right. So it's basically land and buildings owned by any government body. That could be your local council, national agencies, the NHS, even government departments. Property held by the state, essentially, for public use. But the really striking thing is the shift we've seen. Since the late 1970s, roughly half of all public land in Britain now, that's about 2 million hectares, maybe 10% of the whole UK land area has been sold off.
Wow.
Yeah, and the vast majority went to private companies. Just to give you a sense of scale, local councils now own only about 40% of the land they held 40 years ago.
40%.
And the NHS estate, incredibly, it's shrunk by about 70% in that same time.
70, that's staggering.
Yeah.
Half of all public land gone in just a few decades. But you mentioned the data shows a real acceleration after 2010. What happened then? What specifically kicked off that bigger sell-off?
Well, after 2010, that period marked a really big shift. Sharp cuts to public sector budgets hit hard, especially local authorities. They were really pushed into a financial corner.
Right, austerity.
Exactly. Local councils in England lost something like 60% of their central government funding. It was huge.
60%.
Yeah. And this, well, it led to what some people have called a one-off fire sale of public assets accumulated over many decades. Basically, a scramble for cash.
Okay, so a desperate need for money.
Yeah.
And how does this sell-off connect with something else? A lot of us are feeling very acutely the UK's housing crisis.
Oh, they're deeply linked. I mean, the UK hasn't been building enough homes for years, right?
It's definitely not.
So that pushes up prices, rents, especially in big cities like London. And governments explicitly pushed this idea of unlocking public land for development. The hope was free up these sites, you ease the housing shortage, but at the same time you had urban real estate, particularly London, becoming this massive magnet for investors, both from here and abroad. Property values just soared,
Right.
which made these public land sites suddenly incredibly valuable and, really attractive to private developers looking to make a profit.
You can really see that with the sale of New Scotland Yard, can't you? The famous Met Police HQ.
Absolutely.
That was sold in 2014 for, was it $370 million?
That's right, $370 million. To an Abu Dhabi investment group. And that was, get this, $120 million over the asking price. There was a bidding war.
Wow. And the plan? Luxury flats, wasn't it?
Luxury apartments, yes. And it wasn't just a one-off. The Met Police were actually looking to sell up to 200 properties as part of their strategy.
200.
Okay.
Okay, so some people might think, well, it's just changing owners. Does it really change how the land gets used? But what have we actually seen happen? What happens to the priorities for these spaces once they go private?
Well, that's the crucial point, isn't it? It's not just about who owns it. When land moves from public hands to private hands, those non-profitable uses, things like free public parks or community gardens, allotments, truly affordable housing, they tend to just disappear.
Right, because they don't make money.
Exactly. They get replaced by projects designed purely to generate revenue. So this shift, it sort of quietly dismantles the whole idea of public good in our shared spaces, bit by bit. And often you don't notice until it's gone.
That's a really sobering thought, especially when you mentioned allotments earlier. I saw a figure somewhere. Is it right that golf courses take up massively more space?
It's quite stark, yeah. Golf courses now cover about 10 times more land in the UK than local authority allotments.
10 times.
Even though there are, 90,000 people on waiting lists for an allotment, sometimes waiting for decades, it really shows you the priority shifting.
Yeah, it really does. So, okay, let's talk about the government side.
Right.
What was their official reasoning? Why push these big sales?
Well, the stated rationale was kind of twofold. First, release land for new housing. There was the Public Land for Housing program running 2015 to 2020. The target was to free up enough public land for 160,000 homes by 2020.
Okay, housing.
Address the housing shortage by giving developers these surplus public sites. That was the idea. And second, simply to raise money for public services. There was a specific target. Raise £5 billion from land and property sales between 2015 and 2020.
$5 billion.
The thinking was these one-off cash injections could be reinvested or maybe used to cut deficits.
But that context you mentioned earlier, austerity, that seems absolutely critical here. Those massive spending cuts after 2010 really squeezed public bodies, didn't they?
Hugely.
Especially local councils. They were really pushed towards selling assets. And wasn't there a rule change around 2016 that made it easier?
Yes, that's right. A really important change. Councils were given new freedom to use 100% of the money they got from selling assets for what they call transformational revenue spending, not just capital investment, like building something new.
Okay, wait. Revenue spending. So
Yeah.
what does that mean in practice? They could sell, say, a community center
Yeah.
and use that cash to pay for day-to-day running costs, like staff salaries
Yeah.
or redundancy payouts.
Exactly. It basically let them use asset sales as this kind of temporary financial plug. Selling off the family silver, not to invest, but just to cover the bills. It helps in the short term, but obviously you're poorer in the long run.
Right.
And they definitely did it. By 2019, there were at least 64 councils known to have used $381 million from property sales just for cost cutting, and $115 million of that was specifically for redundancies. So short-term cash relief was clearly a huge factor.
And I suppose there's an ideological element, too. This belief that the private sector is just more efficient, more innovative.
Oh, absolutely. That's definitely part of the mix. The idea that private ownership leads to better outcomes. So public assets that aren't being intensively used are seen as, idle or untapped opportunities for private developers to create economic growth.
The assumption being the private sector will just get on with it, build houses faster, use the land better.
Pretty much, yeah. But when you actually look beyond those intentions, how did it play out? Did the results match the goals?
Good question.
Yeah.
Did they hit those targets?
Well, the reality was often quite different. That 160,000 homes target by 2020, badly missed. They only achieved about 65,000.
Only 65,000. Okay.
And while the financial target, the £5 billion, seemed on track, there's actually very little detailed data on who was buying this land or exactly where the money ended up going.
So a lack of transparency.
It's a real lack, yeah. And this isn't just like an administrative oversight. It's kind of what allowed the sell-off to happen so quietly. It creates this accountability vacuum, letting public assets be privatized almost by stealth.
Okay, so let's follow the land then. When it is sold, who actually ends up owning it? And what do they typically do with it?
Well, in most cases, it goes to private sector developers or investors, usually through open market tenders or auctions. So big commercial property developers, large house building companies, they're often the highest bidders.
And community groups, can they buy these assets?
It's very rare. They just don't usually have the capital to compete in an open auction. And actually, less than half of councils even had a policy for something called community asset transfer.
What's that?
It's a way for local community groups to take over ownership or lease public assets, often at a lower cost, to run them for the community's benefit. But if there's no policy, they mostly just sell to the highest bidder. And even when the plan was for housing. Well, an analysis of NHS sites sold in 2017-18 was really revealing. It found that 83% of the homes planned were just for market sale.
83%.
Yeah, only a tiny 5% were for genuinely affordable social rent. And get this. 2/3 of the homes planned on that former NHS land were projected to be unaffordable for an average nurse.
Unaffordable for a nurse on land that used to belong to the NHS.
Exactly. It just shows how consistently the land gets used for whatever brings the maximum profit once it's in private hands.
That really hits home. Can you give us maybe another specific example that shows this unaffordability issue?
Sure. There was a former NHS site in St. John's Wood in London, a very expensive area. It became luxury mansions, each one priced at $3.75 million.
Wow.
And there was zero affordable housing included on that site, zero. Or in Enfield, which is just outside London, a midwife working nearby would apparently need over 100 years just to save up the deposit for a market home built on land that used to be part of Chase Farm Hospital.
100 years. It's just impossible, isn't it?
Pretty much. And it's not only housing. Some land goes for commercial development, shopping centers, offices, private gyms.
Hmm.
Or you see heritage buildings, old libraries, or town halls converted into upscale apartments or boutique hotels. The pattern is always maximizing commercial value.
And you mentioned overseas investors earlier. They're quite active in this market, too.
They certainly are. That New Scotland Yard example, the Abu Dhabi group, that's one. Another big one was Royal Mail's Mount Pleasant sorting office in London. Huge site. Once a public asset sold off, now being turned into, again, luxury apartments.
Right.
It just highlights how often foreign investment targets these very high-return luxury projects, which don't really address local community needs for affordable housing or services. Now, from the government's point of view, the clear upside is the immediate cash, the revenue. Local councils in England alone brought in $9.1 billion just from selling property between 2014 and 2018.
$9 billion, that's a lot of money. And the central government was hitting its target, too.
Yeah, they were on track for their $5 billion target by 2020. So financially, in the short term, it looks like a success.
And how is this money typically used? Was it all going into new hospitals or schools or...
Primarily, it seems, to plug budget holes, especially for those local councils really struggling under austerity. Birmingham City Council, for example, England's biggest local authority, they used £49 million from sales between 2016 and 2018 just to fund service reforms and cover costs. And that included $23 million just for staff redundancy payments.
So literally paying people off with money from selling buildings.
Yes. But there were some examples of broader benefits claimed. The Met Police, with that $370 million from New Scotland Yard, they used it to fund a new, smaller, more modern HQ.
Okay.
And they invested in frontline technology. Plus, they argued they were saving over £6 million a year in running costs by moving out of the old expensive building.
Right. And there was also that benefit of hitting the land for housing targets, even if the numbers were lower than planned.
Exactly. The government could claim progress, say they disposed of land for about 65,000 new homes, without actually having to spend public money building them. The idea was, the private sector takes over from there.
But is this sustainable, selling off assets to cover running costs?
Well, many argue it's what's called a false economy. It's that old saying, isn't it? Burning the furniture to heat the house.
Right.
The cash benefit is a one-off. You sell it once, you get the money once. But the loss of the asset, that's permanent. As one community leader put it very simply, once you've lost the assets, they're gone.
They're gone forever.
Forever from public ownership, yes. And it really raises the question, is that short-term financial gain worth the permanent long-term cost?
That's exactly it. Because while it might look okay on a spreadsheet for a year or two, these sell-offs have very real impacts on communities, on everyday people. And this is where it really does become, as you say, a massive concern. What are we actually seeing on the ground? What are the tangible effects?
Well, probably the most visible thing is just the loss of community spaces. Since 2014, councils in England got rid of over 12,000 public assets.
12,000?
Yeah, and that includes libraries, community centers, playgrounds, sometimes even bits of parks. We know that between 2010 and 2019, something like 800 plus public libraries closed across the UK.
800 libraries.
And these losses, they're irreversible. Once a library building is sold and turned into flats, it's gone. It's not coming back into public use.
But sometimes communities do manage to save places, don't they? I remember reading about Stretford Public Hall in Manchester.
Yes, that's a great example, though sadly quite rare. It's a historic Grade 2 second listed video. The council put it up for sale in 2013 because of funding cuts.
Right.
But local residents, they rallied round, they raised funds, formed a community trust, and actually took it over in 2015, saved it from private sale. It shows community power can work, but it takes huge effort, and it's definitely the exception, not the rule.
So mostly these places are lost.
Mm.
And does that mean we're seeing a shift towards having to pay for things that used to be free or low cost?
Yes, absolutely. You see this diminishing of free or low-cost amenities. It creates more of a pay-to-play environment. We mentioned allotments being sold, school playing fields too, despite huge public demand for them.
And who does that hit hardest?
Well, it disproportionately hits lower-income residents, doesn't it? People who rely more on those free public amenities, libraries, parks, community centers. And we already touched on housing. The sell-off has just been this massive missed opportunity for genuinely affordable homes.
Less than 5% for social rent, you said.
Less than 5%. That's the truly affordable type. Remember the Royal Free Hospital in London? They had a nurse's residence actually donated a century ago specifically for staff accommodation. It was going to be sold off for luxury flats.
So displacing the key workers it was meant for.
Exactly. Removing affordable options for the very people who keep the health service running.
And what about the bigger picture? Does this constant selling contribute to wider social inequality?
I think it inevitably does. It represents a significant transfer of wealth from the public realm owned by everyone into private hands. And sometimes the new developments built on these former public sites are literally exclusive. Gated communities, private squares.
So physically excluding the general public from land that was once ours.
Precisely. And then there are the issues around democracy and transparency we mentioned, decisions often made quietly, behind closed doors. The lack of good, accessible data makes it really hard for citizens to even know what's being sold, let alone challenge it. It raises serious accountability questions.
And then there's the emotional side, isn't there? Losing places that are part of a community's heritage, its identity.
Yeah, that's often overlooked, but it's deeply felt. It can feel like, well, like the dismantling of a public realm forged over a century and a half, as one report put it, undoing generations of collective investment and effort.
It sounds quite profound when you put it like that.
It is. Think about the Neshel's Amateur Boxing Club in Birmingham. Their center was owned by the council. It got auctioned off in 2016 because the council needed the money. The club got evicted.
Just like that.
Just like that. And the coach said, look, losing these kinds of places, these community hubs, it directly contributes to social problems. Young people lose positive outlets. It's a stark example of how the sell-off isn't just financial. It affects social cohesion, maybe even public safety.
And financially, you mentioned Northamptonshire County Council. They sold lots of assets, but still went bankrupt.
Exactly. It shows that selling assets to fund current spending isn't a sustainable solution. It's that short-term fix, long-term pain scenario playing out. So if this trend just keeps going, where does it end? Some observers have painted a pretty stark picture, haven't they?
Yeah, what's the projection?
Well, some project that if it continues unchecked, there could be effectively no public land left by mid-century, maybe around 2050. And key services like the NHS, local councils, they could become essentially landless even sooner, having sold off all their discretionary assets.
Landless. So, okay, if that were to happen, what would that actually mean for us? For you listening? For communities, for future generations?
Well, you could imagine a future where public services increasingly operate from privately owned land, which likely means higher costs, less public control.
Right, paying rent on land we used to own.
Potentially, yes. And critically, there'd be no land reserves for future public needs. Need a new school, a hospital, a park for a growing population. Tough luck, the land's already gone. It's a massive loss of flexibility.
So we'd be stuck.
We could also see our towns and cities become less accessible, more expensive, more privatized public space where your right to just be there might be restricted. Housing would likely stay unaffordable. Social housing waiting lists could get even longer. And our public institutions themselves could become weaker, more dependent, perhaps renting back services on land they once owned.
That does sound pretty bleak. Is it inevitable, though? Is this just the way things are heading, or are there signs of change, maybe alternatives being discussed?
Well, it's not necessarily a done deal. There is growing awareness now, more debate. You've got parliamentary committees like the Public Accounts Committee questioning the value for money from these sales. Think tanks are putting forward alternatives.
Like what?
Things like community-led housing initiatives or councils focusing on leasing land long-term instead of selling the freehold outright.
Leasing. So the public still owns it fundamentally.
Exactly. Retaining ownership allows the public to keep some control and benefit from future value increases. And we are seeing some shifts. Liverpool city government, for instance, has moved towards favoring long-term leases over outright sales, specifically to keep that public interest. And interestingly, there's been a very recent political development. Just in March 2025, HM Treasury and other departments announced a new government task force. Its job: to unlock surplus public land for housing.
Okay, unlock. That sounds familiar. Is it just more of the same?
Well, the language suggests maybe a slight pivot. It could signal a move away from just selling the land off cheap to developers towards a more proactive build-out approach.
Meaning?
Meaning government bodies, maybe like Homes England, could take a lead in master planning developments on public land themselves, ensuring a decent chunk of affordable housing gets built, maybe keeping some public stake in the project rather than just handing it all over. It's early days, but it might indicate a shift in thinking.
That's interesting. And it makes you think about other countries, doesn't it? Do they all just sell off their public land like this?
Not at all. In Germany, for example, it's common for cities to lease land long-term rather than sell it. They keep public ownership. And the Netherlands often does something similar. City governments actively buy land to control development and then lease it to builders under specific conditions.
So England's approach has been quite aggressive, really, in comparison.
It seems unusually focused on outright disposal, yes.
Okay. So wrapping this up then, this deep dive has really shown, I think, how the last decade or so saw England prioritize these short-term financial gains from selling off public land.
Yeah.
But as we've really dug into, that seems to have come at a pretty profound long-term cost. To communities, to the whole idea of the public realm, maybe even the social contract itself.
It really is a massive concern because it genuinely impacts everyone's quality of life, the fabric of our society, and those promised benefits, particularly the idea it would solve the housing crisis with loads of affordable homes, they just haven't really materialized in the way hoped.
No.
Instead, we're seeing these public assets, things built up sometimes over generations, just quietly vanishing from collective ownership.
It really shows how deeply connected public land is with the public good,
Yeah.
and how the decisions being made now, sometimes quite quietly, will fundamentally shape the world our children, our grandchildren will inherit. It leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What do we truly value as a society? What are we actually willing to do to protect that for the future?
Thanks for watching the video.
We'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share them in the comments below. If there's a specific topic you'd like us to cover next time, do let us know.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And if you found this one helpful, make sure to share it with others too.
See you in the next video.